So, David, so what these cruises are famous for are all kinds of food, right?
Right.
I mean, you'll go on one of these cruise ships and you'll eat like 10 times a day, all these buffet lines and all this other stuff. But this may not be so good for the oceans.
Listen.
We've all heard about the sewage, but tell me about this stuff from the food
Well,
waste.
you're talking about the meals. That's right. That's one of the top selling points of these things, and that you can eat just about every hour if you wanted to. So a big problem on these cruise ships is the sewage and what to do with it. It costs a lot of money to take it offshore and dispose of it like our municipal waste. So what most of these vessels do, all of them do, is they discharge it into the ocean. And this can be done fairly safely with the environmental safeguards through what's known as an advanced wastewater treatment system. And part of my article looks at which ships have these systems and which don't. And the ones that don't say that they are abiding by international law and federal law, for that matter, but that law is really lax, and it's meant to address standard shipping vessels with crews up to a dozen or 20 or 30 people, not 5,000 to 7,000 people like we're seeing now.
So you mean you could have, like, on this new ship that they just launched, the Oasis of the Sea, I think it holds 6,000 passengers.
Something like 5,000 passengers, but then there's crew. There's another 2,000 or 3,000 crew member.
So you could be talking about waste for 8,000 people on one of these ships.
More than many towns in the U.S.
And if they don't have one of these advanced systems, what happens to the waste?
Basically, they use what's called the marine sanitation device, and these are, like I say, very outdated. It's what even a sailboat would have, and basically all it does is just settle the waste, and it leaves a sludge, and then what's left of that they can discharge into the ocean, and they use chemicals that are very similar to porta potties. In my story, I talked to a couple who was snorkeling in Puerto Vallarta, and they saw this happen, and they could smell it, and it smelled to her like a porta potty. So this is basically, it's very similar to just dumping maybe hundreds of porta potty contents into the ocean at one time.
Now, you point out in your article that these ships visit some of the most pristine and beautiful places in the world, and so, in other words, when they visit these places, they're basically transporting the pollution, the sewage from the food preparation, the sewage from the passengers, to all these pristine places. Is there any kind of inspection or regulation?
Well, I mean, let's see, they came down on the industry in the late 90s, and they imposed, through a probationary period, through an agreement with the Department of Justice, to have environmental officers on board. Now, these officers are hired by the cruise companies, but they had a phone number supposedly to management where they could go straight to the head office. But in terms of, that's oversight that's self-imposed by the industry.
Well, I mean, are these guys trained environmentalists? What kind of training are these officers?
They were. I think during the probationary period there was strict rules on who those people could be, but since the period has ended, the industry is free to hire whoever they would like, and I don't think that there is any training that's mandatory for that, except for what the cruise industry the company may give to them itself. But in terms of other kind of oversight, there are environmental protection agencies in each state, and most of the states that have a lot of cruises, where they have tried to impose some oversight. Now, even that is basically voluntary. Like in Washington, where they look at the logs, the log books of the cruise ship of when they discharged, how much they were taking on, and try and add up the numbers. In Alaska is about the only place where they have independent monitors that actually go on the ship and watch what's going on.
Yeah, but my question is, if a cruise ship, say, picks up passengers in California and then is out in the middle of the Pacific, do the states have the money, for example, California, to send somebody along and monitor what's going on the cruise?
No. And the other thing to point out is that from a lot of people I've talked to, if you're in the middle of the Pacific and you're dumping this stuff, even if it's probably raw sewage. Although it's not the nicest thing to think about, it's probably not going to have that much of an impact. The real danger is close to shore, and 12 miles is the line of demarcation that a lot of folks are comfortable with, and then even 100 miles is most U.S. waters. So anything less than 100 miles, probably no agency is really going to be concerned with that.
In other words, no agency will pay attention if
Yeah.
you're beyond the 12-mile
Yeah,
limit.
exactly. Yeah.
But even 12 miles is pretty close, isn't it?
Right, right. And in the new law that they're proposing, well, that they've been proposing for some years, the Clean Cruise Ship Act, it's saying that anything over 12 miles, you'd have to use an advanced sewage treatment system. So, right, yeah, they're acknowledging that they want to have they want this stuff more cleaned up more in that area.
One of the things you write about in the second part of your piece is this whole issue of lobbying. And it was amazing the amount of money these organizations, these cruise lines spend on lobbying. What do they get for their money?
Well, they have received several decades of virtually no regulation in terms of a lot of different things. We talk about the ocean pollution, but that's really just the beginning of the things that the cruise industry is doing without oversight. They have air emissions is another environmental issue. There's lots of issues with the safety of the passengers. There's diseases that folks can get. There's been outbreaks of E. coli. It's also sexual assaults that are pretty common. So there's a whole
Of passengers?
of passengers by crew members actually, and those are the types of stories that you often see on Dateline and these other programs, and
Right.
and so there's a
But
whole
I mean,
host of things.
in terms of their power, who are their friends in Congress?
Well, their friends in Congress are those that are on the committees that have a stake in regulating the industry, environmental committees or transportation-related committees. John McCain has been a friend of the industry, and we talk about that in our piece. There was relations with Vicki Eisman, who is a lobbyist with Alcalde and Fay, and that
Right.
is their primary lobby group that the Cruise Line Association uses, as well as individual cruise companies. So yeah.
What is the most egregious thing you found that the cruise companies do in terms of the environment?
Well, I mean, I think it's taken as a whole. When you look at all of the things they're doing, I mean, the sewage is a pretty big one, but there's other types of discharges. There's food discharge. There's food waste discharge. There's gray water, which can contain chemicals, especially from the clinics. They have medical clinics on board.
Now, what about the fuel these boats use? Is it the same bunker fuel we see on cargo ships, or do they use a different kind of fuel on these boats?
I think so. I mean, I don't think it's much different than regular shipping vessel. So,
So bunker fuel is pretty nasty stuff.
Yeah, and that speaks to the air emissions, which clearly is another issue. But I think the most egregious thing is in the face of a lot of these attempts to regulate, or even in the face of laws to regulate, they're still in violation. Like in Alaska, there 60% of the cruise ships last year had some kind of violation, and in other areas like Washington, where they've tried to regulate them, the ships have simply decided to leave that area and discharge somewhere else. So mostly what they're doing in going to Alaska is they're leaving Seattle or Vancouver or Victoria and heading north and going through Canada and the Yukon Territory, where they can do whatever they want.
So in other words, by jumping jurisdictions, these cruise ships can get away with all kinds of things.
Yeah, exactly.
Anything else that you think we ought to talk about?
Let's see. I mean, I think the in terms of lobbying, the other thing that I was really shocked by is how much money the cruise industry spends in various communities, philanthropic donations, other charities. So they have a hand in environmental groups, in their research, funding other ocean types of research, and they use that to influence some of these groups when they have decided to take on the cruise companies.
So they kind of greenwash themselves, is what you're saying.
Yeah, exactly. There was one case we cited in the story where they were funding they were funding a grant for some research, and that same group decided to put out a report critical of the cruise line industry. Well, it was Royal Caribbean. They got upset with it, and they withdrew all their funding for any additional work. So I think it's clear for these groups that if they want to receive this money, which is substantial, that they have to separate their work and say, okay, we're not going to decide to take on the cruise lines if we're going to receive this money.
Very interesting. Dave, thanks. I think that's what we need.
Okay.
So what I need for you to do is send us the tape.
Okay.
Okay?
I can also send it on email, I think. I talked to Byron yesterday.
Oh, that'd be great. Then we can
Friday.
edit it from the email. That's terrific. And then
Do you want to talk about the only other thing we left out is about the journalism.
Oh, we want to get that.
You want to talk
Go
about
ahead.
that?
Yeah. Well, tell me about the journalism.
Well, and this is very similar to the environmental groups and what happens here. And in terms of journalism, when you look around and try and find stories that are critical of the cruise line industry, it's very hard to do. And part of that is because cruise companies are great at giving away free cruises. This is another way, in addition to giving money away, they'll just simply give away free cruises. For travel journalists, this is great because you can score a free cruise and go out and write an article. And it's a travel piece, so it's going to be friendly. But
so they're buying off reporters.
Sure. And I think this happens a lot in the travel writing industry. The problem is that this is a travel industry that has a lot of environmental fallback, and so we would expect to have some critical reporting. Instead, when we look to some of our news outlets that where we look to for investigative reporting, one that I always go to is The Nation. And looking through their pages, particularly because they have been running a cruise educational seminar for the past 10 or 12 years. When I look to the pages of The Nation, I cannot find a single article that is critical of the cruise line industry, especially for their environmental record.
So in other words, by simply letting them come aboard for their little educational seminars, they basically bought themselves clear coverage from The Nation.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how that actually works, but I think that there is some there's some influence there. I don't know if it's exactly very explicit, but it looks to be. That's the appearance anyway. And the other thing that they do is like this year, Royal Caribbean is sponsoring a contest called Reporter at Sea, where they are giving a free cruise on Oasis of the Seas and giving them a tour and behind-the-scenes look. They're giving that away to a reporter who had exceptionally wonderful, glowing coverage of a cruise in the past. And so they're sponsoring this contest. So you would think, however early they may have announced this, there may have been reporters out there aiming for this free cruise and tailoring their story that way. The other interesting thing is that in this contest, they are bringing on young journalists and having some kind of roundtable or conference with these professional reporters and these young journalists, in a sense saying, here's what you can look forward to. So,
in other words, raising a new generation of journalistic whores.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's a cynical look at it from my point, but again, that's the appearance.
Did you ask Royal Caribbean about why they're doing this?
I did. They didn't respond to my.
So they didn't want to talk
request.
about this.
No.
Not
and
surprising.
neither did The Nation either, I should mention.
Yeah. Well, maybe we'll give another call to Katrina over at The Nation and see what she has to say about doing this sort of thing.
Yeah.
But this is very reminiscent of what's happening to journalism in general, where, you've got Atlantic Magazine, this high-end New York literary magazine, famous for its writing, greenwashing companies by putting on a water conference. Mm-hmm. It seems the same sort of behavior.
Right.
Except for the cruise industry, they've really got a lot at stake here, because if they can buy off the travel writers and then keep the environmental writers at bay, they're home free.
Yeah.
Well, David, thank you very much.
Okay, thanks a lot, Joe.
Thanks.